Groupie moment.
Hello and welcome to episode 4 of the Kaiju Groupie Podcast. I am your host, Michael, better known as the Kaiju Groupie, and today I have a really interesting episode for you guys. I'll get into that in a minute, but I do want to take a few minutes here before we get started and do a little bit of housekeeping. And by that I mean I need to read another Apple Podcast review. This review came in from username Awesome Owl. The title of the review, is "This Podcast Spits Hot Fire." The review reads like this. I hope I do this justice. Michael hosts one of the most thrilling and filling podcasts I've ever heard. It's crafted like a fine Wisconsin cheese curd. The deep dive interviews with the kaiju community, it's so good it'll give you viral immunity. The podcast has so much breath, it'll simply steal your breath. He always manages to be so cordial, all I can do is listen mordial. Well, okay. Thank you, Awesome Owl, Alex. I'm assuming that's who this came from. In fact, I know that's who this came from. Alex from the Monsters vs. Men podcast. Thank you, buddy. I really, really appreciate it. So if you want to be awesome like Al and leave us a 5-star review on iTunes, we would really, really appreciate it. And if you do that, all it does is help this show get in front of other Kaiju and Tokusatsu fans just like you. You can also leave feedback by sending me an email directly to kaijugroupiepod@gmail.com. And I promise if you do either one of those, if you leave me a 5-star review on iTunes or if you send me an email, I promise I'll read it on the next episode. So yeah, that's sort of an incentive for you to do so. And again, please, if you want to get this show, if you enjoy this content, if you enjoy what we do, or I'm sorry, what I do, rather, sorry. If you enjoy what I do, and you want to support the show, please do so. Give us a review. Criticize me all you want, but please make it 5 stars worth, and I promise I will read that feedback on a future episode. So, before we get into the meat of the interview, I just want to say that it was an absolute pleasure talking with Henry, the host of It Came From Monster Movie Podcast. And I'm going to be honest, it was a very interesting conversation. I wasn't really quite sure what to expect going into it. This was my very first time talking with Henry one-on-one. And this interview, or this conversation rather, it turned into more of a discussion and a conversation than an actual formal interview. To me, in my opinion, given the state of the world we live right now with, COVID still an issue, with everything that's happening around the world politically and whatnot, and, bringing it back home to the Kaiju and Tokusatsu fandom, everything that's going on in our little corner of the internet, I really feel like this conversation is necessary. And really, at the time when we were doing this, I didn't expect it to be as timely as it ended up being. But I'm really, really happy that Henry and I sat down for this conversation because, there was a lot of things we discussed. And I'm going to say that it's a very candid conversation. It is a very honest conversation. Henry does go into a lot of detail about his background as not only just as a fan, but just his background, his personal life and whatnot. And I feel like that's something that we don't get to see or hear very often. him being Henry the host for his podcast. And so it was a pleasure. It was an honor to have him and sit down with him for this conversation. And I really hope that after it's all over and you've listened all the way through, that you can take away some really positive things from it. And I will say that there are some very strong opinions expressed in this conversation, but I want to encourage you to stick around to the very end because it really will be worth your time. At least I hope so. And if you enjoy it, please let us know. Of course, leave us or send me an email, kaijugroupiepod@gmail.com. And so yeah, I'm not going to waste any more of your time here. I'm going to go ahead and jump right into the interview. So we'll see you on the other side. And we're back, and with me I have the charismatic enigma himself, Henry the host of It Came From a Monster Movie Podcast. Henry, how are you doing, good sir?
I think this is actually the first guest appearance where you've beat me to my punch, where I can't just go like my usual It Came From a Monster Movie as a guest, but that's fine. No. You do you, boo. No, but it's good to be here. Despite my voice, I have been deathly sick all week, but it's luckily not been COVID. But people in the listening were probably like, well, why does he sound so happy? And I'll tell you, acting. So there we go. The show must go on. I will probably pass out after this episode's done.
Well, I hope that you have plenty of fluids available during this conversation.
I have, my mom got me kombucha, like the big giant bottle of kombucha, and I am nearly halfway through it. So
so yeah, I just want to make sure my guests are fully hydrated and mentally ready for the adventure that we're about to go down.
I just sit here being like, man, I really missed the time when you were sick, and you're like, cool, I'm sick. I'm just normally dying, not dying from like a rampaging death disease that's going to shatter humanity at modern stakes for years to come.
Right. I mean, it's I will say this. It's interesting times in which we live, my friend.
Yeah, for sure.
It is very, for sure. And that's really all, that's really all I want to say about that at the moment.
Yeah.
So before we kind of get into the weeds here, I want to give you a moment, tell whomever doesn't know already who you are, a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
Well, I'm Henry, the host. I think that is now legally my name, which is awesome. I am a mutt of the world. My dad is from England, so despite my outrageous accent, I'm actually British as well. My mom's from Pennsylvania. I was born in Texas. I grew up in South Carolina. I went to school in Florida. I've been digging dinosaurs in Montana since I was in the 5th grade. I've been to every continent but Antarctica, and Antarctica is still on my list, and I think I know how to get there, so that's exciting. I've lived in Seoul, South Korea for 5 years as an English teacher, an English substitute teacher, and a manager for a school. And I also used to tell my students that I taught during the day, and at night I was a thespian. I worked with a theater group called Soul Players. They're a community theater group in Seoul that I miss dearly. I made my breakout role as playing Eddie in Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Okay.
I've scuba dived on Blackbeard's boat, The Queen's Revenge, with National Geographic. I've been on the Discovery Channel. I go into a lot of that story on an upcoming episode of Gods and Monsters podcast with Something Ghoulish. And then I also write science fiction. I have the very useful degree of creative writing. And I do a podcast that like has 5 stars after all these years. So like, not too much.
Not too much at all. No, it sounds like you've got a few things. You got a handful of things going on right now. I can see that
and more.
And absolutely. And you kind of just glossed over something there in your bio there that I find super interesting. So you said you've been digging dinosaurs in Montana since age 5.
No, 5th grade, not age 5.
Fifth
Age
grade,
5,
fifth grade. I'm
Henry
sorry.
was not talking. I have, let's just say that I am on a wonderful spectrum of debate still with most people, despite my eloquence. But let me tell you, after rummaging through my mom's storage, holy crap, am I lucky to have parents that I had, because yeah, that's a medical record that I've been wondering about all these years, and now I finally have answers. Now I understand why the college director of like therapy for students shook my hand when I met him for the first time and be like, "It's a pleasure that you made it this far." And I'm like, "Why are you saying that to me? Like, it's a big deal that I'm in college." And then now, after reading those journals, yeah, it was a big deal I went to college. No, yeah. When I was a kid, my mom wanted me to go to summer camps, but I love dinosaurs. They're my passion. Everything I've ever done in life is literally because I like dinosaurs. And some people are like, not everything. I'm like, I have dated people because of I like dinosaurs. Everything that I do is because I like dinosaurs. Like every single action that I have, even my flippin' coming out story of being a pansexual cryptid, is because I like dinosaurs. They are my driving passion. So my mom, being the ballsy woman that she is, and those who know me find that probably to be a hilarious joke, but she emailed Jack Horner himself, and because she just like went through my dinosaur books and just like emailed a bunch of paleontologists, and she emailed Jack Horner and told him what was going on with me and like what my life was like. And he was like, I have a grad student that I used to work with named Vicky Klaus. And then I went to the University of Montana and dug up a dinosaur nesting site and a Lambeosaurus femur. And I might have found a new dinosaur that's still in an archive somewhere. So I'll probably never get that credit. But I did that for 2-3 years. And then I took a break to get my scuba diver's license in North Carolina. And that's how I ended up working with National Geographic on a dive for the Queen's End's Revenge. And then when I finished that, I returned to Montana to work with the Judith River Dinosaur Institute in Billings, Montana. And my first year with them, I discovered a Stegosaurus Graveyard. And after the 4 years of doing that, we uncovered at least 4 Stegosaurus specimens. And I believe they're still digging up more Stegosaurs. But yeah, I have weird friends in high places. Like Michael, you've been listening to my show, and you know that I have really strange scientific connections. So
yeah, you have some interesting connections.
I'm all over the place.
You are, and I find your story super fascinating, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted you to come on.
Yeah, no, I'm what you call different, I think. But you know, I don't know. It's just like everything I've done is because I like dinosaurs. I went to Korea because I like dinosaurs, because I love teaching, because kids like dinosaurs, so I can talk about dinosaurs to kids, and like because of that, you know. When I came back to America, I was a creative writing teacher, but I like made my students watch The Twilight Zone, because I was like, that's good writing, because you got to learn how to like, you know, I was trying to beat out the way the current system is of just writing to write. I'm like, you got to write, you know, you got to show, not tell, right? You can't just like say, oh, this is the twist. No, you got to show the twist. So I told them like, I would show them Twilight Zone episodes. And then as the course continued and they realized how weird I was, they asked me, because I always talk about genre stuff, and they're like, why giant monsters? And I was like, funny you should say that. And I told them the story of Twilight Zone and its true impact on Japan. And I don't know if you know this, Michael, but like Eiji Tsuburaya loved the Twilight Zone. Loved it.
I can kind of tell from his work on Ultra Q.
Because Ultra Q is the Twilight Zone. It's the Japanese version of the Twilight Zone. And I was listening to an episode you just released, and it was funny because you guys like hit it on the head. Ultra Q is Japanese Twilight Zone, and it's just these people interacting with these creatures and concepts, and just everything's so different and weird. But then Edge of Tsuburaya came up with a wonderful idea about like, what if there was something that could fight the weirdness of the Twilight Zone, thus creating Ultraman. And then like, what's funny is I did show Ultraman to my middle school students, the 8th graders, the first episode of Ultraman, and they were like, oh, I could totally see why this is the Twilight Zone in Japan. And they loved it. And they were like, wait, this is 1966? This is pretty fantastic. And then like, you know, all my students saw Godzilla King of the Monsters. They all said it was better than Avengers Endgame. They said they enjoyed it more. I have 6th grade students who love Godzilla. I have kids who are now writing their own stories of giant monsters and dinosaurs and creatures. And they still message me today being like, do you know anything how I could fix this character design or this creature concept? And like, it's great because their passion that I've instilled on them has helped me move ahead with my plans on creating Apex. And we can probably talk about Apex later on in the episode. So there's that.
Wow. Holy shit is all I can really say about all of that, because man, I guess now I can say that I officially have my very first officially unofficial paleontologist on my show.
That is I wear many hats. Like I have closets of hats where it's just like people ask me like, what can you do? And I'm like, oh, I know how to weld. And they're like, why do you know how to weld? I'm like, well, I had to make a cart to move a Stegosaurus plate. And they're like, wait, why did you have to move a Stegosaurus plate? And I'm like, well, because I excavated a plate and I made the plaster. So I was one of the few people who knew how to undo. And they're just like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I have a set of skills that I just keep forgetting that I can do. And like, you know, it's one of the reasons why I was able to get some jobs when I came back to America, because I eventually managed a school in Korea. Still don't know how I did that one. But you know, and then I'm an actor. Some of my plays are actually on YouTube. I've written, there's a really great, I really need to reach out to him, but there's this really cool guy named Dan, and he runs a website called Pop Mythology. Have you ever heard of them?
I have not, but I'll look it up now that you mentioned it.
They're super cool, but if you go through it, I actually wrote all their IDW Godzilla comic reviews. Like for Godzilla Cataclysm and stuff. And then I also wrote, because that was also the year Jurassic World came out, and I wrote the top 5 dinosaur movies you should see that are not Jurassic Park films to prep you for Jurassic World. And what was funny was a buddy of mine Facebook messaged me maybe a week after it's released, and he was like, dude, Henry, have you seen any of these movies? And I was like, I wrote this article. And they're like, no. And I was like, yeah, I wrote this article, bud. Like, I'm glad you enjoyed it, but please read who wrote it, please, because I wrote it. It's fine.
That was your God moment. You just at that moment, you felt like a god.
A little bit. I mean, I still get compliments because I don't know if you've ever heard of this guy. Have you ever heard of Andrew? He does a lot of like, have you been to Godzilla Festival, Michael?
I have not.
It's a lot.
I was gonna go to G-Fest. This year was my very first G-Fest that I was gonna attend, and then of course
a little something called that whole social experiment of a dumpster fire.
A little something called what was it? COVID? Is that what it is?
The COVID Rampage Death Plague. But the reason why it's a COVID Rampage Death Plague is because everybody apparently is an expert on the plague. And I sit here, I always laugh because I've actually this is my second pandemic that I've ever lived through. Because when I lived in Korea, we had the MERS outbreak. And like, to be honest, like everybody applauds South Korea on how they handled this. And I'm like, yeah, because I was there during MERS and like, they just lost their minds. And sorry if I curse, but like they did. Because like, it was this crazy virus, MERS. It's a bit like SARS. It was going all over the place because like a Korean doctor went to the Middle East and he got sick and went to like 9 different hospitals by cab, and it just went through so like wildfire. And I'm just sitting here like, I'm in America. We don't usually have this issue. But then it was really funny because I knew something was wrong when they killed the camels at the zoo.
Oh God.
Because there's
Oh,
an
wow.
article that said that camels were a transmitter for MERS, and they killed they had 9 camels, they killed 5 of them, and I'm like, those were camels that were born in Korea. Like, how would it? And I was like, they don't know what's going on. And like, I did get a week off of work, and that is how I ended up seeing Jurassic World the day it came out 4 times. Sorry, did I see it 4 or 3?
4 times.
No, I saw it a total of 8 times, but I saw on opening day, I saw it. I think I saw it. Hold on, sorry, I gotta do math. I woke up because we had school off that whole week because of MERS. And it was funny because like every person who was Korean was home, but every foreigner, because we don't know how pandemics work, because none of us have gone through it, we're just all out and about enjoying the thing. Like, you know, everybody loved going on the subway, because if you wanted a subway car to yourself, all you had to do was cough. And every Korean person would just like go to the next car. It was great. But I woke up, I'll never forget it. It was that Thursday morning. I woke up, I checked my phone. I ordered my Jurassic World tickets at 9:00 in the morning for the 9:45 show. I got up, put my Jurassic Park shirt on, got my little stuffed T-Rex that I've had since I was 4, went to see Jurassic World at 9:45 in the morning, cried the whole time because it's just like seeing a world where everybody's so excited to see dinosaurs and all that jazz. Like, I'm bawling. This poor Korean woman, like 3 seats down from me, this old Ajima, which is Korean for old lady, she's looking at me like, what's wrong with him? Is he scared of the dinosaurs? Like, why is he crying every time a dinosaur comes up? Why is he crying when the music starts hitting? Cried a lot. And then I got out of it, and a buddy of mine called me up and was like, hey, do you want to see Jurassic World? And I'm like, yeah. And then I saw it a second time, like literally an hour afterwards. And then, nope, I did see it 3 times, because then I saw it in 4D, which was super cool. But because of MERS, it wasn't super 4D because there was no water effect, because they didn't want you to get sick. But it was super fun.
Gotcha.
So
yeah, I can totally relate to that, because, you know, growing up, I did watch all the Jurassic Park films in theaters. My dad, who's since gone, took me to my very first movie, which happened to be Jurassic Park. I think 93?
Yep, 93.
Right? 93. Okay. So he took me to my very first movie. That was the very first movie I ever saw in theaters. And from that moment, I was hooked. Now, I was already into dinosaurs as a child. I had little plastic toys just like everybody else.
Yeah.
But from that moment, I was hooked, man. And then that spurred into my love of just dinosaurs and monsters in general. And of course, I kind of graduated from that, and I watched not Super Sentai, sorry, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and then from Power Rangers went to Godzilla, and then the rest is, of course, history. But I can totally relate to what you're saying about tearing up in movie moments, because I rewatched the Jurassic Park trilogy a couple of years ago for the first time in a very long time. And as soon as that music hits, that dun 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 dun, you do get all the feels. You do.
Yeah.
And I got the same emotion when I watched King of the Monsters and Ifukube's music hit. During the first confrontation of Godzilla and King Ghidorah. I mean, I got the same. You know, it sounds really stupid to someone who's not within the fandom, for like a 33-year-old man tearing up at 2 giant monsters, but you know,
no, I mean,
it is what it is.
You're totally fine. No, when I saw King of the Monsters, it was my last day of school, coming back to the States, and I was just happy to leave, because that's that's the beginning of the end for my mental state because of 2019. But I went to see Godzilla King of the Monsters on IMAX the day it opened.
Right.
And I saw it with my friends who wanted to see it with me, because like I saw Godzilla King of the Monsters 8 times in theaters as well, because everybody was just like, Henry, you want to see Godzilla King of the Monsters? I'm like, yeah. Like what else? Like, they're like, don't you want to see this movie? I'm like, the only other movie I saw that wasn't Godzilla King of the Monsters was Rocket Man, because my mom wanted to see it. But I was like, but the Godzilla was in the next theater over, and I'm just like, I mean, I'm enjoying this movie, but King of the Monsters is right next door.
And it probably makes it even worse that you can hear some of what's going on in the theater.
Yeah, it was time. But I always laugh because the IMAX experience, because I was pumped. But I didn't it was one of those things where I was pumped because, and just going back into teaching, and this might be a good segue onto why I do my podcast the way I do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go for it.
Is so, unlike a lot of the other monster movie podcasts that are out and about, and I actually think out of all of them, I'm probably more akin to your show than I'm a weird mixture of what you do, what Kaiju Apostle does, and what Monsters vs. Men does, where it's we talk more about the people who watch these movies or the people who are unfamiliar with these films, and we kind of expand those concepts because I was a little bit inspired by because I ended up teaching a film class, and when I was teaching it, a lot of the students I was working with knew who I was, and they all obviously the first day of film, they're like, "Okay, Henry, teacher, I gotta know." I'm like, "What? Why giant monsters?" And I'm like, "Well, real quick, guys, just to let you know, 12 Angry Men is my favorite movie of all time. That's by far, I think, the best cinematic piece ever made." And then everybody's like, "Why is it?" And I'm like, "Well, watch it." And then my students watched it and they loved it. But they're like, "Well, why giant monsters?" So I pulled up YouTube and I'm like, "All right, kids, let's do this quick, brief thing." And I was like, "Here's a trailer for Godzilla versus Godzilla King of the Monsters that's coming out in 2019." And they're just they see I played the, I can't remember which the one that's over the rainbow trailer.
Oh yeah, that was a
good one. And I showed that. So these kids are seeing these really well done special effects of giant monsters appearing and Mothra, Rodan, Ghidorah, Godzilla, all duking it out. And they're like, "Wow, that looks awesome." I'm like, "You want to see them the first time?" And they're like, "What do you mean?" And then I pull up that clip on YouTube of the final fight in Ghidorah, the three-headed monster. And you just see Ghidorah doing the nut shot at Godzilla with his gravity beam. And you see Mothra just being the bad puppet spewing thing. And the kids are like, "Wait, those are the same characters." I'm like, "I know, but here's the cool thing. What you guys are seeing in Godzilla King of the Monsters is what I have always seen with these movies." And they're like, and then they said, "We want more. What other monster movies?" And I'm like, "Oh, you think that because one kid said oh, these special effects are bad." I'm like, "You think those are bad?" And I pulled up the trailer for The Killer Shrews and explained all that. And they're like, "Well, what about modern monster movies?" Because they talked about Sharknado, and I was like, "Kids, don't mess with Sharknado. It's not, don't do it."
No.
But
no.
But I will say I actually will be doing Sharknado for my show soon because my friend Greta, who's a wonderful voice actor and writer in Korea from my Soul Players days, and she's actually releasing a comedy superhero audio drama called Tights, I believe is what it's called. I hope I got that right, Greta. I'm so sorry. But she did me a huge service this summer. So she's getting her own episode of the podcast, which will be Sharknado. And it was funny because I was like, "Greta, I really don't want to do this." She's like, "Well, don't worry, Henry. I'll get a guy who's on Sharknado to be in our episode." I'm like, "You know someone who was on Sharknado?" And she's like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Okay, cool. We'll do that. That's fine. I'll watch Sharknado with someone who was in it. That will justify my brain." But I showed them Sharktopus, and then I was like, I will never forget it. I showed them the Sharktopus trailer, and I showed them the Sharktopus versus Terracuda, and then I showed them, and I still haven't seen it. I'm saving it for my show. But do you know how that's a trilogy?
I do not. So, honestly, I don't.
Sharktopus is a wonderful trilogy, apparently, and the final film is a movie called Sharktopus versus Whale Wolf.
Oh yes, I heard you talk about that. I can't remember what episode it was. Was it?
I have no idea. I just get so excited because I looked at I'll never forget looking at my kids. They're like, "Wait, teacher, it's called Whale Wolf," and I'm like, "Yeah, get it? Because it's like werewolf, but it's a whale wolf. this doesn't write itself, guys. Like, like, and like, I know you just listened to our Godzilla versus King Ghidorah episode, and Millie, who is one of my favorite people I've ever met in my life, she and I have a nice past together. She has, and I'll tell you after this, but I'll tell you her lineage in a bit, and people can maybe look it up because her wedding was in People's Magazine. I guess I'll tease that, but I like, one of the reasons why I loved Millie being on that episode is, one, it was really last minute. I literally called her up 30 minutes before and was like, I had a guest drop out. To you and Ben want to watch Godzilla versus King Ghidorah 1991. And she said yes. And I think she sums it up perfectly, which is like, I wouldn't have thought of it. I wouldn't have written it. Like, and that's what I love about this genre. It's just like, most people don't realize that there are these worlds, like this whole film genre of just wonder. And I love it. Like, I love doing this podcast and loving to keeping the format, not just with doing giant monster movies, but just doing all the monster movies, except, the Lovecrafty ones. Because like I said many times on my show, Lovecraft's a racist. If you don't believe me, look up the name of his cat. He was a horrible person, and maybe don't think that his writings, like, he wrote well, but he's a racist. So it's like, that's fun. Like, go watch Lovecraft Country, because I'm stoked about that, because I'm like, oh, good, they're gonna talk about it. He a racist, but it's just one of those things where I just love doing this show and like getting people on. Like, even when I do Godzilla films, I try not to get, like, I had Denny on because I was like, Denny, I need you on Godzilla King of the Monsters to talk about dinosaur stuff with me with Godzillasaurus. And he was like, down. And Denny's great. Go look at his art. He's an awesome guy. Sure. And he was on our episode for Crawl as well for our G-Fest special last year. But I try and make it, because like my target audience isn't the everyday monster viewer. It is mostly like people, so they can understand, like, oh, maybe monster movies aren't that bad. Like, what's the first episode I got Matt Frank on? Jurassic Park. And then I did get him on Godzilla 98, but that did get him sick. So,
Shame on you, Henry. Shame on you.
That is why I do have awkwardly that review from David saying that I am the podcast that killed Matt Frank. And I think, that's a badge of honor in your first year that I managed to kill one of the most successful, inspirational illustrators of our time in the genre.
I want to, before there's so much here I want to unpack, but before we do that, oh Jesus, let's back it up just a little bit and tell me kind of the origins of you have sort of alluded to it, what the origins were, but kind of, if you want to tell us sort of the backstory on how it came from a monster movie, got started, whose idea it was, et cetera, and who you collaborated with in the beginning.
No, for sure. Happy to, actually, because I love this story. So as a kid, with what God gave me, my wonderful wiring of a brain, and having no social skills, I developed abilities to learn social skills. And that is
psychic abilities?
No, just think of me as a Shakespearean fool, pretty much, right? Gotcha. So the Shakespearean fool is pretty much the puppet master of the whole play. Manipulating people in a way that can either benefit them or not benefit them. I wrote a whole senior dissertation on this, with Hamlet being like a Shakespearean fool who realizes his power but doesn't know how to do it. You've got Feste from Twelfth Night, who is a good fool and knows how to do his powers for good. And then you got Othello with Iago being a bad fool and using his powers for selfish gain. So what I do with my powers of the Shakespearean fool is, whenever I had friends over, I made them watch my monster movies. Like, my friends hate monster movies now because they know things that they wish they didn't know, but they do now. That's great.
Like Velocipaster.
Like wonderful Velocipaster. Wonderful Velocipaster. But it like the true origin, I think, is in college, because that was when I really didn't know anybody. I just moved to Florida to go to Eckerd College, and I was in a dorm and stuff, and I kind of struggled making friends still because I just didn't know what to do. Because usually it was like I wasn't super confident in who I was yet. So what I used to do, and I've talked about this on my show and some other shows, is I would go to Publix and I would buy lots of food and drinks, and I would put them in the common area, and the aroma of food and drink would lure people out. And I'd be like, oh no, I bought all this food for me to watch this movie. Do you guys want to help me eat this food and watch this movie with me? And when they said yes, the deal has been made. The pact has been made.
The blood pact.
The blood pact has been drawn. And they're already consuming the food that I bought with my own money. Because I haven't said what movie I'm putting on. And I think I said it best with Alex and Eric on their episode with them, where it's like, oh, so Henry, by the way, what are we watching? Oh, we're watching a little ditty called Godzilla Final Wars. So that
you couldn't have picked something like The Thing or Mothra versus Godzilla. You had to go with Final Wars.
That's not fun. Why would I do that? Why would I show people good movies? Like my friend Dave, who's been on the show with Altitude, it's really funny because he and I became friends in Korea, not just because we were both head teachers at our schools and we just both ended up every end of the week being like, I hate people. But he was like, Henry is my favorite person to watch movies with because Henry has a film background. He knows how to talk about film. He knows what a good movie is, but you'll never get him in front of a good movie. He'll never show you a good movie. He will show you movies you didn't even know could exist, that a person could not just only write, but people could act in. He'll never show you actual real movies. And I was like, Dave, I can show you them. He was like, but I don't want you to, because I because not only do you get to watch these films, it's like, stuff, things, history, and you get to learn more. So, this whole kind of acclimated into the idea of my first summer back in America. I went on a road trip. I went to all these cons because of what I was trying to do was trying to pitch my H Universes stories to people. And for those playing the home game, the H Universes is this elaborate, I have 28 different story concepts from science fiction to fantasy to nonfiction, all this stuff. All original concepts, and I want to write them. They're, I want to make them realities because I think they're really good stories, and I think they're stories that need to be told. And not to humble brag, but Apex, the first draft of it was called Titan Wars, and it's my original giant monster piece. And everybody's like, how do you know it's good? And I'll say, this is how I know it's good. And this is actually my biggest regret in my life. And I try not to live with regrets, but this is honestly the biggest regret in my life. And sometimes, yes, it does leave me staring at the ceiling at night going, dear God, if I had a time machine, I would go beat the living hell out of high school Henry for saying no to this opportunity. My marine biology professor in high school was brother-in-law was Ron Howard's assistant. And she pitched my Titan Wars concept to him. And he told Ron Howard, and I got a message saying that Ron Howard wanted to talk to me about a potential movie deal because he wanted to create something like what I was working on. And I said no, because I thought I needed a college degree to do that. And then I went to college and was told science fiction was the ghetto of writing, and I couldn't touch my baby for 4 years. And, there are good things and bad things that came out of it. But I sit here being like, I could have said yes, and Tyrannus would have existed before I turned even 20. Like, because Ron Howard himself wanted to make it a movie, but now that opportunity has passed and I don't want to lose it. And I will say Apex is what I am more comfortable releasing, and that's going to become an audio drama sooner than later. Expect a Kickstarter on that soon. But
Okay.
but when I came back, I realized that I had gone on all these cons trying to pitch my stories and stuff, but at the same time, I was still a nobody. You know, I was just some like kid who came back from Korea with all this crazy experience, but no one knew who I really was. So I was trying to think of an idea of what I could do to become a presence, a voice, an identity. So when I do pitch my concepts, people actually can be like, oh, I know that guy. He's cool.
Right.
And I lived out of my Prius for 3 months on this road trip.
Okay.
And my only friends were podcasts because it was just me on the road for hours. I nearly died in Nebraska because, man, that state is flat and only one road just going on and 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 on. It was awful. It was the worst part of my whole trip. I nearly died. I was like, I've never been on a straight road for that long in my life. But like podcasts were really helpful. I enjoyed listening to them. And my best friend in this whole entire world is this guy named Zach. Zach and I have been friends since I was in middle school. He and I actually started off as rivals because that's what you did in middle school.
As all good friendships do.
Good friends do. And then we became best friends, and we've always wanted to create something. Like, he knows that I'm the ideas guy and he's the music editor, sound editor guy. And I came back from my road trip, and then I, went abroad. I circumnavigated the globe a bit. I went to England to see family. I went to Thailand and lived in the mountains for a month and a half to find myself. And now I'm a vegetarian. And I got to see elephants though. And then I went to Australia and I swam with a crocodile, and I went to Sydney, and I went to Weta Workshop in New Zealand, and I went to Hobbiton, and I talked and interacted with all these people. I went back to Seoul for Rocky Horror Picture Show. I went to Vancouver to see Dave. When I came back, I was like, man, what am I going to do? I want to make something, but obviously an audio drama might be too much to start off with. What's something I can do? And when I was with Dave, he was like, you always can get people to watch a monster movie. So I called Zach up and I was like, hey, what if we made a podcast? And Zach's like, oh man, I love podcasts and I'd love to edit a podcast. What do we want to do? And I'm like, what if we did what I've been doing for years, which is just simply tricking people into thinking they're going to watch a good movie, and then I have to make them talk about it. And he was like, I mean, you're not wrong. That is what you're really good at. And I was like, yeah. So we then did the Meg, not knowing really what my format was going to be. And then eventually, fun fact, the format that I do to grade our movies is actually kind of how I graded my students' creative writing papers. I mean, I kind of
noticed that because you actually give them a letter grade.
Yeah. And it's not it's not from the idea of obviously I did not grade my students on monster concept, but I did grade my students because I'm a big advocate. Grammar is important, but as a teacher, I'll fix your grammar and I'll explain to you why it's wrong and all that jazz. That's what an editor does.
Sure.
But me, I always was bad at grammar as a kid, and I was lucky to have teachers who could look past my grammar and be like, Henry has really good ideas. And I feel like when you have bad grammar but really good ideas, you kind of get pushed aside thinking you don't have good ideas. So I was a big advocate of being like, no, your story is really original. It's really good. You have good characters. But then I'd be like, your grammar structure could use some work. Your formatting could use some work. But my enjoyment of your story is very high. And that's how I grade my students. But of course, obviously with this podcast, I changed grammar and format into concept and design and execution, because I realized we did the Meg for the first one, And then I sat here being like, well, it's a really good movie, but how are we really going to explain to people why The Meg is a shark movie you should watch and not think, oh, it's just Jaws but bigger. And that's we don't really see that really getting that lightning strike until our episode with Colossal, because that's when I kind of started getting on the head. And what's funny is it used to be just design, not execution. It only became execution after one of our Lost episodes was made. We did we did Prophecy. Are you familiar with that one, Michael, with the bear?
Prophecy of no. I thought you were going to say Prophecies of Nostradamus.
No.
I'm sorry.
There's a movie called Prophecy. It is about a mutated bear, and it is delightful. Delightful. It has the best. Oh man, why can I not talk today? Words are so hard for me, and like looking at these journals of me as a 6-year-old, I'm like, damn, they were always hard for me. You can look it up on YouTube. So Prophecy has the best death for any character in a monster movie in the whole entire world. So it's about this mutated bear on a rampage, and there's a subplot of this like family camping. And so they're camping, and then the bear comes and like kills everybody. But
God, this sounds so familiar because
the son is in a sleeping bag. And not to interrupt, but just the son is in the sleeping bag, and he's still in the sleeping bag, and he's like trying to hop away. And the bear comes and smacks him. And then the sleeping bag, you see his face scream, and then you see the sleeping bag smash into a rock, and it just explodes into feathers. No body, just feathers everywhere. Where's the body? Nobody knows. I guess the child death was too graphic, so replace it with feathers. But it was funny because we were watching that movie, and we were like, wow, this is actually really good. But then there's one scene where you see the bear run, and you're like, oh man, that's obviously just a man in a suit. Like that actually made the bear less scary. And that's where we ended up putting execution, because sometimes you do get something that looks beautiful, but then when you see it in movement or how it's being used, you're like, it could have been better. So yeah, that's I some people think that the grading system's a little rushed, but I'm like, you got to listen to our episodes. Like, I always say, because Michael, I told you what Shin Godzilla is getting, right?
I feel like you probably did, but I've since forgot.
Well, that's going to be a hot take episode. 110%. Cannot wait. Uh-oh. It's going to be a good time.
I feel like you've told me that because when I first reached out to you for this show, it was one of the very first things you told me. One of the gradings I think you've already recorded the episode. Correct?
I have recorded every episode until November, our Godzilla Remembrance episode, which will come out November 5th. And then we take because COVID and mental health and I had to fill something up with my time.
Well, I was going to say, you had plenty of time on your hands, it sounds like.
Yeah, and like now that I'm happy that people are doing the Patreon rewards, because like you and I are going to join Alex for his reward for his episode of The Thing, which I'm really looking forward to. And like just a shameless plug, guys, if you go on the ICFAM podcast Patreon for 2020, you give me money, I do whatever monster movie you want to do. You pick the guests, I pick the time, and we do it. It's fun.
So in theory, if I was a Patreon, I could make you watch Turbo, a Power Rangers movie.
Yes. Because even though I forget, did Turbo have a monster, or did they just fight aliens?
It had Malagor at the end.
Right.
The one that would later become Dark Spectre in the series.
Right. And this is the one where the Blue Ranger was a kid, correct?
Yes.
It's funny because last night I was doing an episode for the movie Nightbreed, which when that comes out, everybody's going to laugh at that because that was one of my famous Henry Freakout episodes. It's not a bad movie. It's just not for me. But we kept comparing to characters in that movie to Ivan Ooze, and one person did not know who Ivan Ooze was.
Oh boy.
And they were like, I gotta look this guy up. And then they did, and they're like, oh no, yeah, no, most of these guys are definitely Ivanhoos. And I was like, yeah, no, I really can't wait to talk about Ivanhoos one day. But
what I find really fascinating about your podcast, Henry, I'm sorry I interrupt you.
No worries, interrupt me away, because I'll just keep talking.
I see that. But but one thing that really kind of intrigues me about your show is because you really don't pull any punches on your show.
No.
And you will give poor grades to beloved films and at least what would be considered cult classics within the fandom. And I'm specifically talking about like the Godzilla Kaiju fandom.
Mm-hmm.
Like you gave Godzilla versus King Ghidorah from 91 a D.
Mm-hmm.
And I know a ton of people who love that movie and would probably grade it probably much higher than you did. But the one thing I do love about your show is not only do you pull no punches, but you also highlight films that normally us as a fan base probably wouldn't give the time of day to.
Yeah. And like, yeah, I honestly was surprised that Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah got a D. I mean, I sit here being like, at least it passed. At least it like did it fail. That was good. I still have not gotten a Godzilla film that's gotten an F, which is great. But like, you got to also remember that on my Godzilla episodes, I usually don't have Godzilla people on them. Because my show is more for a bridge to show people what monster movies to watch. Because I feel like people look their nose down at monster movies. Mm-hmm. And, and maybe this is a great point to talk about, like, a lot of modern day takes on the monster movie is on that beloved film Pacific Rim, which I cannot stand. I love the cinematography of that film, mm-hmm. but Pacific Rim created this concept, which is why we have the title for this episode about the kaiju film, because I hate it.
It did. And I'm glad you brought that up because I was trying to find a good segue to get into that. So when I first pitched to you to come on my show, you just kind of threw it out there that you hate kaiju.
Yes, I hate kaiju. Thinking, what an awful concept.
What an awful concept for a kaiju for a podcast that focuses on talking to kaiju fans. So I'm going to be talking with somebody who hates kaiju. Mm-hmm. But it's not what you think. No. It's not what people would think. No, not at all. And honestly, what I told you before we started recording, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. So let's get into that, Henry. Let's go ahead and drop the bomb and say, or ask you, why do you hate kaiju?
So I hate it because I think the word causes too much friction and chaos, and the word itself is gatekeepery, and I think it creates an identity that is not true to the form. I know I probably said this a little bit more elegantly on Monster vs. Man, but I do always try and point out, like, because I used the word kaiju as a kid. Sure. Fun fact: before I learned what copyright was, Titan Wars originally was called Kaiju Wars, and it was all about Godzilla. It was all about the Godzilla monsters and stuff. But over time, it was only me using it, and I was fine with that. Mm-hmm. But then when Pacific Rim came out, everything became a kaiju film, and I was just like, and I think I met someone once, or else. It was, I think, the first time I was really going on the Godzilla online forums. And it was when I started seeing people being like, oh yeah, King Kong's not a kaiju. Or this is a kaiju, but not the ants from them. Or the gargantuas are a kaiju, but the 50-foot woman isn't. And I'm like, they're both giant monsters. Like, those are giant monster movies. And then it's like, oh, well, Japan makes kaiju films. I'm like, yeah, but you're saying Yongari is a kaiju film. But one, having lived in Korea, fun fact, Korea hates Yongari. Most of the time, if you went to Seoul, South Korea right now, Michael, and asked like, hey, where can I buy Yongari toys? One, you couldn't because they don't exist.
Okay.
Two, I'm pretty sure the Korean cut of that film no longer exists or is very hard to get by because Korea does not like it. The only form of Yongari that exists today is Yongari is what you call dinosaur chicken nuggets in Korean. Like, so if you went to a shop and said, can I get Yongari? They would probably take you to the frozen food section to get dinosaur chicken nuggets. That's what Yongari is.
That's hilarious.
Oh, it's super fun.
That's hilarious.
It's like,
and I think you're right. I've never been able to find the actual Korean cut of Yongari.
No, they can't
I've only been able to find the American dub.
And then it's like, and then speaking of Korea, people always keep telling me that The Host is a kaiju film. And I'm like, how is it a kaiju film? Like, Guemo is a monster. Like, he's just a mutation. He's not, yeah, he's a giant tadpole. But like, when I think kaiju, I think a city destroyer. And then I even looked at it and I thought about it like, actually, we've been using the word wrong. The true word is Daikaiju because a kaiju is a strange beast. That makes sense to me. Like, if
Correct.
you said monster movies were kaiju films, then all the movies that I've done on my podcast are kaiju films because they are all movies about strange beasts. But if you're using it only for giant monsters, like I sit here, adjust my glasses, and I hate to say, like, technically we should be saying Daikaiju. And that should only be for the Japanese films. But like, it's such a wonderful menagerie of words, and like the arguments people get into about like I'm team Clifford the Big Red Dog when it comes out as a movie. Yeah, we're doing it on the show. Cannot wait to do Clifford the Big Red Dog the movie because that to me that counts. Like that completely counts as a giant monster movie.
I know you mentioned as an aside on an episode, where you said you're going to be doing Lilo and Stitch.
Because it's a monster movie. Peach Dragons is a monster movie. Like these, because it's not, monster movies don't have to be scary. They don't. Not all of them are horror films. Not all of them are giant. Like, I meet people and they're like, oh, you do a lot of horror films. And I'm like, I wouldn't call Lilo and Stitch a horror film, but sure. I don't even consider Jurassic Park a horror film. Uh-huh. And it's just one of those things where I just feel like, and I also feel like it's very cultural appropriate-y a little bit, using kaiju a lot, because like it's like what is it in Korea? Like, do you know what Konglish is?
No, I'm not.
So Konglish is Korean English. It's when Koreans adapt English words.
Okay.
Right?
Gotcha.
So when I was teaching teaching English in Korea, I was with my middle school students, my upper level, and I had a student tell me that Konglish came before English. And I was like, what are you talking about? He was like, well, egg is a Korean word and egg is the English adaptation. I'm like, it's the other way around, bud. It's the other way around. And like, he didn't believe me. And I sat there being like, you know what? To be fair, that's understandable. But like, the thing is, like, it's just, and I'm trying to like, I actually am trying to hold my punches. Cause like, I do feel bad. Cause you're the Kaiju Groupie, and I'm literally telling you like, I can't stand your name, but that's not the case.
No, it's fair. It's fair.
It's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just trying to say that I think like as a fandom, like there's a lot of problems right now in the world, like a lot of issues. And like, we're such a niche group.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and it makes me think about something Henry Rollins once said. And it's kind of something that I think is relevant to not just this conversation, but to everything, which he was like, everybody's like, when you hear a racist talk, you got to boo them and then they walk off. And what does that cause? It just causes more resentment. It causes more like frustration. So eventually it will grow and grow and grow until it becomes feral and ugly.
Sure.
No one's having a discussion. Everything's starting to become a thing. And like, you know, people have to be held accountable, and people shouldn't be have to held accountable. And like, don't say that, don't say this, don't whatnot. And I sit here being like, we're a bunch of Americans who are worshiping this film genre in Japan that is popular, but it's not as popular as you think. Especially like in other countries, like whenever people talk about Yongari with me, I'm like, Korea hates that movie. Korea doesn't like Japan. Like when people ask me, oh, I bet you got a lot of Godzilla stuff, I'm like, it was really hard to get Godzilla stuff. In fact, when I went to Japan as a kid, I couldn't find Godzilla stuff in Japan until I got to Tokyo. I found tons of Ultraman stuff, but nothing really Godzilla centric. And it's just like, I just was on Monsters vs. Men for Gamera vs. Segra, and that's a blast of an episode. I do so many hot takes in that episode that I'm looking for. They did not realize I was going to go and talk about such hot takes. I believe I even compared Gamera vs. Segra as the prototype to Godzilla 2000. Can't wait for those ads.
Whoa, watch it now.
Yeah, I know, right? Right? But it's just like one of those things where like I really love my show because I get these people on to watch this genre who don't have the background that we do, where it's just like, oh yeah, Hiroshi Honda's a pacifist, blah, blah, blah. And they're just like, no, this is dumb. Like when Luba watched Godzilla vs. Mothra in On Earth Day's Attacks, it's just like, why is Godzilla in this movie? Like, it's just about Mothra and Batra, and like Batra's awesome, but Godzilla's like has no motivation. Like, it's funny when I hear people talk about these movies I really like, and then I hear counter arguments, and I have to play devil's advocate because I'm the host, and I have to hold my biases. Sure. But at the same time, like, I don't mind giving grades like that, because the thing is, like, you know, it's like everybody got mad at me for giving Jurassic Park an A-, and I'm like, go listen to the episode. I didn't hate the film. I just don't think it deserves the A+, because like I'm a fan of the book. Like that's my opinion. That's my experience. But I feel like the kaiju genre, everybody's trying to say like my rules for kaiju are everybody's rules, but that's not the case. Everybody comes into this genre with different backgrounds and reasons. And then when they think they found sanctuary because they're now with a bunch of monster people, and then all of a sudden people are telling them like, that's not a kaiju, or this isn't a kaiju, or Godzilla will always beat this monster, or God forbid Kong wins. And I'm just like, none of these are real, you know?
Okay, buddy, you are preaching to the choir, I feel like. Now, I will admit here, and please, and all 5 listeners that are going to be listening to this episode, don't hate me, but I have been a little bit guilty of some of the gatekeeping and things myself. Especially early on in my I call it my rebaptism into the fandom after Godzilla 2014, after a very long hiatus. I've always been a Godzilla and Giant Monster fan, but it wasn't until like 2014 that I became comfortable to talk about it in public. And I know that sounds really stupid, like to a lot of people, well, why would you be afraid to talk about a movie? But you got to understand, this fandom, this genre of film, it's not as popular as a lot of folks would assume. It's and I show Godzilla films to my friends, especially, and I like to show them the Showa films because I like to laugh at their reaction. And they just don't understand because, you know, they're all into sports ball and Marvel, and they jumped on the Marvel bandwagon along with everybody else. But I think there was something you said there, or something you alluded to rather, when you're talking about all that is, and the way I kind of translated it was, we just don't know how to speak to each other anymore in a constructive way.
Not at all. Like, and you're right. And like, I was guilty of gatekeeping too. To be honest, I was guilty of gatekeeping my fandoms, not just with Godzilla, but like Doctor Who, science fiction, dinosaurs, all this jazz, Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
Like when but I changed my opinion about it because I was at a bar in Seoul and I was talking anime with this one person and she freaked out at me that I'd never seen One Piece. And I was like really taken aback by it because I'm just like, I'm sorry, I just have never had any interest. And it's like, well, you can't be an anime fan if you haven't watched One Piece. And I sat there being like, is this what I sound like? And then I started being more aware. And then when I meet people who, like, when I tell people, hi, I'm Henry, I like dinosaurs. And they're like, oh, I'm sorry, I've never, like, don't be mad at me. I've never seen Jurassic Park. I'm like, why would I be mad at you? Like, why do you automatically have to apologize for thinking that I'm going to be mad at you? And I realize nerds are awful. Like,
yes, we
like,
are.
We're really awful because we just get so angry that we don't have that connection. But all it does is just isolates us. And then, like, I mean, look at Twitter. Like, I love who I follow on Instagram and Twitter. But there are some conversations where I'm just like, especially recently with, like, you know, I consider him a friend. I'm not going to say his name because I don't want to cause drama, but I consider him a friend. I know why he said what he said, you know, whatever. But everybody, like, turning this specific person now into like, oh, I've lost faith, And I'm just like, everybody's a human being. Like, I have said stuff on my podcast that I'm just like, man, I know I'm going to get added or something like that. Cause like I try and be aware of stuff. And I just realized that like everybody's just really sensitive. And it is a sensitive time. There's a lot of change going on.
I agree. And it's been several months back now, but on the other show I'm on, Kaiju Weekly, with my friend Travis, I made an offhanded comment without thinking it through, and someone took offense to that. And I was wrong for the way I said it. Now, it doesn't mean I don't hold a similar opinion, but I was wrong in the way I said it. I should have been a little bit more. I should have maybe worded it in a way that wasn't so dogmatic.
Yeah.
Let's just say that. But we all make mistakes. And I feel like you grow as a fan and you grow as just a person in general. It doesn't have to be a fan when you admit that you're wrong sometimes. And I think a lot of us within the fandom have a very difficult time admitting when we're wrong, or admitting when we're willing to have our mind changed, or admitting that someone can have an acceptable opinion outside of our own.
Yeah, it's just wild too, because sometimes like I sit here with hot take being like, everyone's like, oh, there's not enough girl monsters. And I'm like, well, in my head, Destroy is a girl, because I read somewhere that apparently like had Destroy as like crotch plate is mirrored to a female's crabs. I don't know, but I'm just like, yeah, Destroy is a girl, and moving on. But I've had people like yell at me being like, here are all the reasons why. And I'm like, it's a dragon crab. Like, you know, I'm sure you might have heard it on my episode, but I remember my second GFest that I went to, I got stuck in it. I don't know how I got into this, but I got stuck in a conversation about Godzilla beam density. And I'm like, what's going on? Like, why are we here? Like, you know, none of these movies are canonical. Like, what? Like, there's no connect. Like, yeah, everybody has their own ideas of like how the Showa films line up to each other, but like no one from Toho has said like after the fact being like, oh yeah, they're connected. Like, no, like it's just like, you know, I laugh because everybody's mad now with Frozen 2 in ways that I can't believe. Like, for instance, like now that we know what happened to Anna and Elsa's parents, spoilers, but like now the fan theory that Tarzan's Anna and Elsa's long lost brother is now debunked. And I'm like, what are you doing during the day? Like, or the one where like Aladdin is set in the future, and that's why Genie can do pop culture references. And I'm like, what is going on? Like, I mean, like, bravo for thinking of that, but no one at Disney at the time thought like this. Like, there are some Godzilla films, there are some Gamera films, there are all that definitely have a message and a purpose. And like, for years, I hated Godzilla versus Ghidorah. Hated it.
Same.
I mean,
it's only been like the last year that I've grown to appreciate it.
Well, it wasn't until I had my episode for it, when I watched it with Zach and his wife and Sean McGinnis from Neo Monster Island. And I was like, oh my God, it's the Rocky Horror of the Godzilla franchise. Like, it's just bizarre, but it's got a great message and it's super cool. Or there are movies that I've watched where I'm like, wow, this was actually a lot better than I thought it was. Or like, wow, I never would have thought that this movie was bad or could be considered not enjoyable for some people. Like,
sure.
Everybody got mad at me for giving the giant claw an F. Another prime example, because as I keep having to remind people, you have to remember that the giant monster genre, and why I just think giant monster is just an easier term, it originated in America. Like, the beast from Godzilla's a dinosaur and not an octopus because they wanted to compete with the beast from 20,000 Fathoms.
Right.
This is why things are the way they are. At the end of the day, you have to understand how a market works, and that's just what was working.
Sure.
And then Gorgo appears, and that's why like giant monsters are usually dinosaurs, and it's all this stuff. It's just all this stuff, and like people just gotta like take a breath, calm down, remember it's not real. Have fun with it. And like I was saying with the giant claw, yeah, it's an F film on our podcast, but it's an F for fun. Like, it's a bad, guys, it's a bad movie. Like, the giant claw is an awful film. And like, it gets an F, but it's one of the, like, I always tell people, like, we have fun Fs on the show. There are some movies that are not fun, like Beyond White Space, where you get to hear me like hysterically scream into my microphone for like 10 minutes about why I could not stand that film. And then there's like a movie like Elves that we did for our Christmas special. And I was so disappointed in that film because turns out that was a Christmas film about Nazi eugenics. That was a monster movie that I really wish I did more research into before watching it. And I didn't even give that movie a grade. That ended up being a whole conversation about like, don't be a Nazi. And it's just like, I think it's just like, for me personally, the word kaiju, I don't mind when people say, oh, I like Daikaiju films. And I'm like, my brain goes like, yeah, because they're Japanese giant monster movies. God, strange beast. Fine. But when people are like, oh, the kaiju fandom, and I'm like, that just sounds so gatekeepery. Because I sit here being like, I didn't even realize that apparently there's beef between the Ultraman fandom and the Godzilla fandom until recently. When did that happen? I just sit here being like, I don't understand what happened. And like, I don't know if you've listened to the Giant Claw episode, but my friend Beth is on that. She became a fan of Godzilla because of my show, because she listened to the King of the Monsters review and rented it. Now she loves it. And like, she's now watching Ultraman with me. She's seen Gamera the Brave with me. She's watched Rodan. She loves the genre. But like, I get nervous because I'm like, don't go on the internet. Because one, you're a girl. So automatically you're going to get judged that you're doing it wrong. And I sit here being like, I'm going to defend you, but I'm in no mood for this. It's also one of the reasons why I try and get a lot of women on my podcast, or just queer people in general, because I want to give more voices that like, it's not a dude's club. Like, Mothra is a strong female character and has beaten Godzilla in almost every film that she is in, because technically Toho favors her a little bit more than Godzilla, because Mothra is a truly unique concept of a monster. Right. But it's just like, God forbid you tell a Godzilla fan that. Like, Godzilla's not invincible. He's died more times than he's survived his own films. I'm so happy the Monster vs. Men podcast got people talking about the Godzilla anime properly again. Because, Godzilla the Planet Eater was my first A for the show. Because I had learned while researching that Toho wanted women to enjoy that film more than the giant monster audience. So I made sure that my friend Morgan, who is an anime fan, watched it with me. And she was like, Henry, it hit all the things about why I like anime. And I was like, oh my God, Toho did it. They're just marketing machines. And like, I love the Godzilla anime every time I watched it. I was like, why are people hating this? This is a really cool story because it's just a sci-fi film and Godzilla happens to be there. But people don't like new. It's like King of the Monster Problems or 2014. Like, yeah, 2014 got a D on our show, D- on our show. But it's not because we hated it. It's just like it had problems. Like that's not a movie. Like my show is the purpose to show people who are unfamiliar with monster movies. Like if you want to get into it, what's an experience that you're going to enjoy and want to keep learning about? Not like, you don't blast Gamera versus Zegra day one, obviously. You get there.
No.
You get there. It's, I can't wait for you to hear that whole episode, Michael. I think you're going to have a blast.
I'm sure I will. I really enjoyed their last episode with Matt Frank.
Yeah.
And that was a blast. And I know
Matt's
from talking,
always a great guest. I love having him on the show.
From talking with Alex and Eric in the DMs, basically what they're trying to do with Gamera is just have fun.
Yeah.
They're just trying to have fun with it because neither one of them, with the exception of maybe the Heisei trilogy, Alex, I don't believe has watched any of the Showa era films, at least not like in a serious way, maybe outside of MST3K.
I'll be honest, when I get my Gamera box set, it'll probably be the first time I've seen the Showa films without MST3 help. When I was doing research for my episode on their show, it was the first time I saw Gamera versus Zegra in Japanese. And I actually talked about it on the episode. I'm like, guys, if I would say if you want your serious monster movie or a monster movie that takes itself seriously, watch that one subbed. I was actually really surprised how much more solid of a film it was subbed than dubbed, because there's less talk about Coke from Helen in the subbed version. She actually drinks other things besides Coke in that film. But I just feel like, I don't blame people. It's like where people have problems with Game of Thrones. Like I have problems with Game of Thrones because it's just British fan fiction, because British history fan fiction, and it drives me nuts. But now everybody's into fantasy. Now everybody's into superheroes. And then of course, like us, the nerds who have been telling people for years they're good, now have been shown that they are good, but people didn't listen to us first. And we're getting resentful for it. I mean, backstory, back in the Henry time machine. And Michael, you literally could say, Henry, no more backstory, please. But
fine. No, it's fine. I'm enjoying the conversation, man.
You know the honey badger meme? Like honey badger don't care?
Yeah, okay. I know it.
All right. Setting the stage. I went to South Africa when I was in 5th grade. After my first dinosaur dig, my family went on one last giant family adventure, and we went to South Africa. We got to Cape Town. We went to a cool place called Groupie Podcast, and then we went to Phinda National Wildlife Reserve. I herd of bull elephants came into our camp one night. That was fun. I hid in a wardrobe. And then we ended the trip with tagging a white rhino, which was super cool. And oddly enough, rhinos feel very soft. But when I came back from my trip, of course, all my friends were like, what was the scariest animal you saw in Africa? And when I was in Groupie Podcast by the Cape of Good Hope, there were signs everywhere of like, beware of honey badgers, right? So I tell everybody, I'm like, guys, I did not know this, but there's an animal in Africa called the honey badger, and holy snap, that was probably the most dangerous thing I was most scared of. And they're like, a honey badger? Because no one knew what a honey badger was. And then YouTube showed up, and then Honey Badger Don't Care happened. And then everybody's like, Henry, do you know what a honey badger is? Apparently they don't care. And I'm like, I would look at them and I'm just like, I literally told you this last week. I went on a whole lunchroom rant about like how the honey badger was one of Africa's most terrifying animals, and no one believed me. But now you saw a YouTube video with a song, and now you're like a honey badger expert? Like, and of course that gets me resentful. To this day, it still gets me a little resentful. But I also sit here being like, why am I mad that they are learning and like getting into it? Like, don't be mad about people wanting to learn things or having an opinion. Like, you know, it's just, I get really exhausted about, like, I'm, you know, between you and me, Michael, and I guess everybody listening to this episode, I am terrified to do Godzilla versus Biollante.
Oh, yeah.
Terrified.
You got to give that film at least a B to make people happy, man.
Well, I don't know, because to be honest, I can't stand that film. I love Biollante, but I feel like that movie goes in so many ways and directions that I wanted more. Like, that's what the problem for me with that movie. I wanted more out of Biollante, you know? I wanted more out of the plot. And then it's just, you know, it's convoluted in parts, and that's fine. And there's like, and don't worry, guys, lots of hand gestures are going on because I'm trying to explain how convoluted I feel about it. But like, I know everybody loves it. And I just sit here being like, I'm, you know, if you're going to give me a Heisei film, like, I'd probably pick Godzilla vs. Destroyer, but I can't rewatch it all the time because it's like, oh, that's it, the end.
Honestly, over the years, I was in the camp of I absolutely love Godzilla versus Biollante, but over the course of, you know, reevaluating some of these films, I've come to find out I don't love it as much. I still love it, but I don't love it nearly as much as maybe I did when I was, say, 12 or whatever. If I'm going to go for Heisei, I'm probably going to pick up, I don't know, Return of Godzilla, either for 84 or 85.
That was my first Godzilla film. That is how I got into the genre. That film.
Or Mechagodzilla 2, which I catch a lot of shit online, which I catch a lot of shit from Eric about.
Actually, no, I keep forgetting to yell at them about this, but I will talk about this. I love Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla 2. That I think, no, take it back. Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2, I think, is my favorite Heisei film. Like, and what's funny is I hate that Mechagodzilla design so much. Yeah. So much. But like,
Kiryu or old school 74.
You know, it's funny. I also didn't appreciate old school, but the more I realize how much I love Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, I'm like, oh yeah, I'll jazzmatazz Mechagodzilla any day of the week.
Well, you've heard my theme music.
Yeah, so. No, I was so happy when that was it. I was like, good, I'm going to listen to this podcast. But it's just like, I don't know. I just feel like and you know, long story short, well, okay, no, long story, still long story. But like, that's why I can't stand the word kaiju, and why I hate it is because I feel like kaiju is just this gatekeepery bubble of like angry people who just like can't wait to snap at somebody about why they're wrong, or how dare they have a different opinion, or how dare you say that this is that. And I'm just like, calm down, everybody. And then it's like, you know, as awful as it is when people like, I'm a Star Wars fan, I'm a Doctor Who fan, yeah. And I hear people like say, well, we're not as bad as Star Wars. I'm like, yeah, we're actually pretty worse, because like, you know, yeah, people are mad about the new trilogy, and I sit here being like, I actually love The Last Jedi. I love Rey's character. Can't stand Rise of the Skywalker, because you did it, Disney. You made a Star Wars film, but it was a Star Wars film. And if you had any Star Wars background, you know what's going on. And if you're just a normal fan, you don't know what's going on in that film.
So it's a Suino, so it's Star Wars in name only.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's just like, you know, I'm sitting here because my brother and my other kind of brother person, you know, we grew up on Star Wars, but I'm the only one that's like watching the shows and read the comics and da-da-da-da. So watching Rise of Skywalker, I'm like, oh no, this is all lore stuff. This is stuff that you have to read extra material about. Because my brother kept leaning over. He's like, when did this happen? And I'm like, so Palpatine's a clone. You know, part one. Just like, I don't want to sit here watching this movie having to explain, like, so Palpatine's a clone. He always was a clone. This was a thing. They were supposed to do this, but they did. Like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that in a movie ever. I don't want to have to explain to people something accessible why this is that. Like, that's why I like King of the Monsters, because you don't need to know about all the Easter eggs. Like, you can just enjoy it to enjoy it. But,
right. I mean, it's helpful. Now, don't get me wrong. It's helpful to know some of the Easter eggs, like the references to the twins with the references to the monster twins, or
the fact that all of the bases are the years the monsters come out. I personally like to say that King Ghidorah's base is because he has 3 heads and 2 tails. That's my thing, because he's Outpost 32, and I thought that was clever. That's my thing.
Yeah, I could never. I never could figure out why they called that.
Well, it's also apparently, I think officially it's because it's half of 64.
Well, yeah.
But I sit here being like, no, 3 heads, 2 tails, 32. That
makes more sense to me.
That makes more sense too. But it's just like, one, like, if anybody's has listened to it this far, one, use Daikaiju when talking about these films. Use Daikaiju, because that's what that means. Like, I sit here not wanting to do cultural appropriation, but just say Daikaiju. Or like, and I don't even mind Ultra Kaiju, because that makes sense to me. But just like the broad term of if you say kaiju film, it's a broad term. Do not make it a specified term. That's why it's just safer to say giant monsters. Just my opinion.
So we're not advocating for splitting them off into separate categories then?
No, I just like... I mean, I look at like dinosaurs, right? Everybody knows what a dinosaur is, but like for some reason I'm like, oh, and birds are dinosaurs. And I'm like, well, birds didn't go extinct. I'm like, but they're dinosaurs. Like, at the end of the day, they are dinosaurs. They're still dinosaurs. They're just a part of the dinosaur family. But if you say, oh, no, birds and dinosaurs are different, I'm like, no, they're not. They're the same thing. Like, I don't know why you're so mad that this thing and that thing are different. Like, stop. Just say Daikaiju. That's all I'm asking. Like, if you want to get specific about Japanese giant monster films, say Daikaiju. But if you want to use kaiju, include everyone in that party. Reptilicus, Gorgo. Don't include the host. Everybody needs to stop telling me the host is a giant monster movie. I don't know why. I'm going to get into it when I do that movie, because, like, I'm so mad I never went to I lived in Korea for 5 years and I never went to the Han River. And there's actually a statue of the damn thing on the Han River that, like, roars on the hour. And I never went. And I don't know why. I think it's because I'm stupid. But just, like, I just don't understand why everybody has to make everything into, like, nice little boxes, when I'm just like, no, it came from a monster movie. That's a broad spectrum of film. It's why I do what I do. And if I'm going to do a broad spectrum of film, I'm going to have a broad spectrum of people that I like. Sure. I picked the cast for Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah because it's one Godzilla fan. My friend Alex loves giant monsters, but she's also a Doctor Who fan. Millie's a Doctor Who fan. Ben's a comic book nerd. Like, I loved Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah as a kid because that was the movie that came out the year I was born, and King Ghidorah is my true origin into Godzilla. Like, but I'm going to not stand aside and say, like, oh, that movie's, like, Academy Award-winning amazingness. No, that movie has a plot that, I think Ben says it best. At least the time travel makes more sense than Endgame. And that's terrifying because the time travel doesn't make sense. Like, as I've grown older, Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah doesn't make any sense, but it looks pretty, and that's fine by me. I'm okay with
and that's cool. It's great. It gave us King Ghidorah, which to me is my favorite Godzilla antagonist.
Yeah.
As far as a giant monster goes. See, there I'm already correcting myself.
Yeah. I notice that with people when I'm on their shows, that they start correcting themselves, and it's delightful.
Now ask me probably 2 hours from now when I'm on Twitter or something. It's like, Hey, Kaiju Groupie Pod. What did we talk about today? Well, we talked about kaiju and how kaiju
you
are
even heard
kaiju.
Eric when we did on the episode of them where he said kaiju, and I'm like, aha, you see why I'm learning this word. Because it's not it's not, don't use it. It's a bad word. Just like use it correctly. That's all I say. Like, because I also sit here. Did you ever hear about the show Kaijudo?
No, I have not, but that sounds super fascinating to me.
It's great. It's like Pokemon with kaiju. I don't know, but they actually talk about. It's great. It's a great show. I actually really applaud it. It was like one of the. It's kind of akin to Digimon, which also are giant monster movies. As my one friend, people are like, wait, you're gonna do the Digimon movie on your show? And I'm like, yes, I'm going to do the Digimon movie on my show because it's a monster movie. Like. What do you not understand? Like, why do you want to make this genre so subgenre-y? Like, I don't mind subgenres, but I want to talk about them all because it's fun.
Right.
Plus, now I don't have to worry about ever running out of material because they keep making them. But it's just, oh man, there are some movies I'm going to have to really get drunk for. It's going to be rough. It's going to be a rough time.
Well, I'm glad you said that. So, because you watch a lot of movies, and we could kind of segue from here, but I'll ask you really quickly since you brought it up. What are the movies that you have reviewed that you recommend people have to be drunk for?
Ooh, I actually have a list on Letterboxd for this. Hold on.
Oh God.
Well, actually, oddly enough, the first movie we ever gave an A+ for is a movie that you should drink with. Not because it's bad, but because it's called Grabbers. It's an Irish monster movie, and the plot is simply these like vampire alien squids start invading this small town in Ireland, and they find out the only reason why people have survived is because they were drunk. So because the blood alcohol in your system is poison to them. So it's a hilarious film. Like 10 out of 10 recommend Grabbers. It's a great film. But
I'll recommend that one to Travis when I talk to him later.
Here are all our F films. These are films that you do hear me drinking on several times. So Beyond White Space, Sphere, got an F. Contamination, got an F. Frogs, got an F. The Legend of Dinosaurs and Monster Birds. That's rough. The Crater Lake Monster, Tsunami. Oh, Tsunami. It's Tsunami is a podcast record because I found out my grades can go into the negatives. It has a -3 out of 25 out of my scoring system. So bravo, Tsunami. Mammoth is a drinking film. Tabernacle 101, which is a movie that for some reason I was asked to screen for, and I felt so bad because I'm like, this movie was awful. Thanksgivings was bad. You should drink to that. The Day of the Time Ended, which was David's white behemoth gift to me. I don't know what happened with that, but you got to drink for that. Queen Kong's a good time. That's with wine. That's a wine drinking game.
It sounds well. We watched that one during Kaiju.
I love Queen Kong. I think I think I recommended Queen Kong in Kaiju Quarantine. That might have been.
I'm pretty sure we watched that one.
Oh wait, that was my doing. Yeah, because I was going to help coordinate Kaiju Quarantine, but then I missed something, so I. Yes, that's right. Altitude, Nightmare Shark, The Swarm with Michael Caine was awful. Scooby-Doo and the Monster of Mexico, you really have to drink tequila with. Bigfoot's pretty tough with Alice Cooper. That was a drinky film. I think also I've said that some of our D films are drinking game films. Which of course is like Godzilla King of the Monsters. I do say our on Letterboxd, our solid Ds are anything but solid films, but they are deep enough for viewing for a viewing or two, scoring from 16.5 out of 16 out of 25. These films showcase dubious plots with attempts of deadly monsters. These are good, quote unquote, dumb films. So it's not like,
fair enough.
It's not like I'm saying these movies are bad. Anaconda has a C+ because that's just the campiest of camp. But it's, you got to take our letter grades with a grain of salt. And I always tell people who get mad, I'm like, go listen to the episode, because it's not that we hated it. I mean, Godzilla versus King of the Monster, Godzilla King of Ghidorah got solid 5s for both their concept and design execution, I believe. It's not, it's not that we said it was bad. There are good parts about it. The idea of Godzilla versus King of Monsters, why do I keep calling it that? You know what I'm talking about. Everybody knows what I'm talking about.
I know what you're
It's a good concept. It's awesome. But the story needed work and the characters need work. And those are, God forbid, characters are important to a monster movie. Jesus Christ.
Well, you're saying the humans are important to a monster movie?
Yes.
Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, humans are apparently important to monster movies. That's why they're a character. They're a grade setting on this thing. Stupid show that I host.
I didn't know that humans also played a really important role in some of these films.
You also know what? Just talking about movies and human characters, I still can't believe that people have not gotten more mad about Lisa Nestinger and I giving the X from Outer Space a solid A+ and linking it to Shin Godzilla.
Now, the link to Shin Godzilla is a little iffy for me, but I actually do like the X from Outer Space.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. If you haven't listened to it, give it a listen, because I do explain why it's a bit Shin Godzilla-y, which is hilarious once people hear the Shin Godzilla episode itself. But it's, people just need to remember that these are just movies, and there are good movies and there are bad movies, and it's okay to like bad movies. It's okay to like good movies. It's okay to like movies that you like, because everybody's different. For God's sakes, just calm down and don't use kaiju, just say giant monsters.
I believe the moral of the story for this conversation, Henry, is people can like what they like, and as long as it's not hurting anybody, why does it matter?
Don't be a racist. It's that easy. Don't be a racist. Don't hate queers. Don't be, and I sit here being like, some people don't like, I personally like to use queer because I am queer, but I know some people don't like that term. And if that is the case, just know that that as someone in the LGBTQ plus community, I do use that term to describe myself and the culture. If that offends you, I do apologize, and I understand why. But at the same time, don't be homophobic. Don't be a racist. Don't be a sexist. It's that simple. I sit here being like, you don't want to be a sexist? Go listen to Mara Mallory's book, The Lady from the Black Lagoon, which is about Millicent Patrick, who, by the way, this woman is the reason why Chernobog from Fantasia exists. She is also was the person who created the creature from the Black Lagoon, but she wasn't credited because she was a woman, and the man at Universal Studios was a giant man baby because he wanted the credit, even though he didn't even touch the thing. So calm down, everybody. Don't be a racist. Don't be a sexist. And accept all creeds and religions except Nazis and racists. It's not that hard.
And Henry will love you forever if you do so.
Yeah, I will. Well, I mean, I'll love you forever until you tell me Avatar is good, because then that's a 3-hour rant about, or, oh yeah. And just real quick for Pacific Rim people, if you're like, oh, Pacific Rim's a kaiju film, one, it's not. It's a giant monster movie, it's a giant robot film, because that. Two, if you really want to prove to yourself that it's not a kaiju film, go to a friend that likes Pacific Rim, that is not a fan of giant monsters, and ask them to name at least one of the monsters in the first film. Because they're all named. They all have names. We all know them. But an average moviegoer, they're just like, I know Gypsy Danger and Sharona Alpha and Crimson Typhoon. It's like, isn't it funny that they know the names of the robots, but not the monsters, even though the monsters were all named but Slantern. So I will give you credit on that one. Interesting, isn't it?
I'll have to kind of out myself here. I know Leatherback, and that's really the only kaiju name that I can remember.
They're all they're all named. They're all named. Yeah, all of them are named. When Knifehead shows up, they call it Destination Knifehead. When Leatherback comes out, it is Destination Otashi and Leatherback. And I sit here being like, how do they know like such great names for these monsters? I think Onibaba is called Onibaba, which is the crab one. Slantern and Raiju were also named. No, Slantern was the big bad. Raiju, and then what was the other one? See, because that's the other thing. They're only said once. So you're just like, okay, cool beans. And like, I feel bad because the first kaiju of Pacific Rim, I think, has the best giant monster name ever, which is Trespasser. But now apparently it's Axehead. So whatever, I guess. I think Trespasser's such a better name, but whatever. It's my opinion, I guess.
And Henry, that doesn't make you any less of a fan,
right?
At least in my eyes, that doesn't make you any less of a fan, man. That you don't know most of the names, but not all the names.
But
and
that is like the point where I'm like, oh yeah, because like everybody knows like Godzilla and Mothra. I mean, heck, people knew what the Mutos were. Isn't that funny? Isn't that funny how that works? So
before we get out of here, I like to ask my guests, and I'm sure knowing a little bit more about you, I'm sure you have a laundry list, but what right now are you binging on? And it doesn't necessarily even have to be giant monster related.
I'm binging Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood right now. The reason why I had to stall is because I was eating lunch and I just got to the episode where they were doing the back story for the homunculus. And I just really liked that piece. And I was like, okay, now I got to go do the episode. That was what my 5 minutes was. But I also recommend the anime Brand New Animal, BNA, by Trigger Studios, because at the end, there is literally a Godzilla and King Ghidorah reference. Like the final fight is King Ghidorah versus Godzilla. It's awesome. It's fantastic animation. And when I'm not binging on those shows, I am currently working on setting up Apex, which will be my blockbuster audio drama about giant monsters. Sure. Did you listen to that teaser?
I have not yet. No.
Well, when you listen to the teaser, let me know, and I'll send you the field guide I'm working on so you can kind of see these monster designs that I'm doing. But
actually, better yet, if you want to send me the audio to that, I will play it during the episode. How about that?
No, I mean, the audio is like 30 minutes, so you probably...
okay. Never mind.
But the Apex will be a blockbuster-style audio drama, because apparently I have friends who work on the Pokemon anime. Because of course I do.
Of course you do.
Of course I do. Of course my friend was the lead role for the Genesect film. And I just found this out, and I'm so mad at her that she's been on my podcast so many times and she has not told me this until recently. But Apex's Kickstarter is coming out soon. I'll be writing the scripts for that and getting and depending on how much money we raise for the Kickstarter, I'll be able to afford really cool voice actors and make it a big production, which would be awesome. And when I'm not doing that, I'm just trying to get my life together, because 2019 was a lot of emotional damage and 2020 started off rough. Don't live with your managers, kids. Step 1. Because I know they'll never listen to this. So don't live with your managers. Don't get into a romantic situation with them. And don't, for the love of God, ignore your problems. Because it will go bad. And of course, the fourth and most important rule: if you're going to talk about giant monster movies, say giant monster movies. If you're going to talk about Godzilla, say Daikaiju. That's it.
There
Drop
we go.
the
There's
mic.
the moral of the story, folks.
And then, of course, the Patreon on IckFan Podcast. And at any tier level, $1, $3, $5, $10, you get a movie of your choice. You get to pick the guests. If you need help with picking a movie or guests, I'll help you through that process. And then we'll record it and it will be played. And it's my big thank you for supporting little old me during this crazy time of the year. And expect some really cool stuff coming up down the pipeline. We're almost done with our July set. Next month for August will be August of the Apes, which will feature the films Congo, In the Shadow of Kilimanjaro, which is about baboons. So you get to hear me talk about my hatred for baboons. Because Michael, I hate baboons. I knew I hated baboons, but that episode is going to show that I apparently really hate baboons. Just a lot. But Rise of the Planet of the Apes is also in that. And my friend Barbara, who's a stem cell geneticist who studies the human brain, will tell you how Planet of the Apes could happen, which is exciting. And then it ends with Kong Skull Island, which is a fantastic episode, for sure. But yeah, and then we have our TeePublic store as well, which supports the podcast and all the great artists. And Michael, you have a TeePublic store, correct?
Not yet. I'm working on one. I'm going to be pulling you in, see if you can help me with that.
Yeah, but, and then when you get that stuff up, I'll put it under the umbrella so that way everyone gets. That way, more people can see your stuff.
Sure.
So that just because at the end of the day, it came from a monster movie. It's not trying to just help me out, but it's trying to help all the artists, scientists, and content creators that I know spread their information and worth and all that jazz. So, but yeah, Michael, this was super fun. I apologize for talking a lot, but I'm sure you probably heard that's something that I do when I'm a guest.
I was already prepared for it, man.
Good.
I really, truly was. In fact, I probably won't even edit a whole lot of the stuff out during this episode because honestly, this was a fun conversation. In fact, I had high expectations for this, but you exceeded those.
Oh, I appreciate it.
Exuberantly.
I expect you to be called the Giant Monster Groupie after this. Or at least the Daikaiju Groupie. I don't know. You do you. I'll just silently judge you every month.
Don't judge me too hard.
No. I'll you know what? I told Alex and Eric this, but I think I'm like the black sheep of this community where it's just like, who's that over there? I'm Henry. I hate kaiju. But don't you run a podcast about? Yes, I do.
and that's what was a little bit funny when you brought up the topic, as you said, "Ooh, Henry the host hates kaiju."
Please
I'm
do.
Like, okay, all right, we're doing it. We're doing it.
And I love that everybody's going to be like, "We're 30 minutes in, and he's still talking about how he dug dinosaurs in Montana." I'm just like, when is he going to talk about Godzilla?
Thank God for timestamps is all I can say.
Right. Anyway, but Michael, this was such a pleasure. I really appreciate, and I can't wait to have you on my show when we do the thing.
Oh, it's going to be fun. I'm sure, because I love interacting with Alex. He's in my DMs all the time, and I've really enjoyed this conversation. So I'm hoping that you and I can stay in touch even after this is over.
For sure. No, because like I said, I'm going to message you at least once a month to be like, why are you not the Daikaiju Groupie yet?
So, listener, if you've stuck around for this long, thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. I apologize for taking
up your time, but hopefully you learned something. Don't be a racist. Use Daikaiju.
Oh God. I am looking so forward to having you back at some point, man.
Please
I really
do.
am.
I'll talk less.
Oh no. I again, it was a pleasure. It was my pleasure, of course. So as always, audio listener, thank you again for listening, and we will catch you guys next time.
Catch you on the flip. Don't be a racist. Use Daikaiju.
Thank you for listening to the Kaiju Groupie Podcast, a podcast produced and hosted by Michael Hamilton using redcircle.com. If you enjoyed today's episode and want to continue this conversation, please email me directly at kaijugroupiepod@gmail.com. Also, follow us on social media by joining the Kaiju Groupie Facebook group, on Twitter at Kaiju Groupie Pod, and on Instagram at The Kaiju Groupie. The show is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you find your favorite giant monster podcasts. Also, please take a moment to rate and review the show. This will help spread the word to other Kaiju and Tokusatsu fans, and if you do, I promise I'll read your comments on the next episode. All film, audio clips, and graphics belong to their respective copyright holders with no infringement being intended or implied. So until next time, I'm Michael, the Kaiju Groupie, signing off.